So it's a beautiful morning in the British countryside, so I thought I'd come out and talk about the 10 things that I'm loving so far on the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S. So I've only had this bike for about 3 weeks now. I've done around 450 miles, so by no means is this my definitive list of everything that's great. It's just the initial impression. It's the 10 things that have really leapt off the page and wowed me in my first few hundred miles on this bike. So let's get into the list. So the first thing that really strikes you when you get on a big adventure bike like this is just the sheer road presence of this bike.
So confidence inspiring. There's something so lovely about being sat up on a big, tall adventure bike. You feel like you're the king of the world. You can see over the top of traffic. You're probably more visible to people around you as well. There's something just really lovely about being perched up here. And it's something I thought that I wouldn't enjoy as much as I am. It's kind of weird to say, but I suppose was slightly intimidated by big adventure bikes. But once you get on one, I think it's hard to imagine going back to being kind of tucked up in a low-slung sports bike hiding between the traffic. With this, you've just got such great visibility of everything around you. It's a great feeling.
So the next thing on my list is the ergonomics, and choosing the right bike from the ergonomics perspective is super important. You've got to get on it, it's got to be right for you in terms of its dimensions.
For me, I'm an average size guy. I'm like 5'11", 32-inch inseam. The leg position, the way that your legs just kind of just drop directly down, you're not particularly tucked up. That's really nice. Your arms are nice and wide. The back position is kind of bolt upright. I mean, ever so slightly leaning forwards, but really, it's nothing. As I said, it's just a very comfortable place to be, and that is, of course, very important when you're on a bike like this, a bike that's potentially going to be doing some significant miles. Any kind of mismatch in the ergonomics between the rider and the bike, you're going to feel after a couple of 100 miles. So make sure that the bike's right for you. But for me, personally, the reason it's on my top 10 is that it just works.
So the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S comes with one of the world's most sophisticated suspension setups on a street bike. It's semi-active suspension, it's super advanced, and you can put all the specs to one side because ultimately what it boils down to is just a fantastic riding experience.
It's got a lot of stuff going on that I don't really know or understand enough to tell you about in detail. I do know that it's doing around 50,000 calculations a second to keep you safe. But it's not just about safety. Obviously safety is very important, but it's really about comfort and convenience as well. The way that you can set different modes on the bike depending on what's going on. So depending on whether or not you've got passenger, depending on whether or not you've got luggage, you can instantly go into the menu here and you can just set up those different configurations, which saves a hell of a lot of messing around.
So you can't talk about the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S without talking about the engine.
The power is immense. And now I'm stuck behind traffic. But you get the idea. It is an absolutely outrageously quick engine. It's a big 1300cc V-twin. So you would expect it to be a little bit, what would you say, characterful, badly behaved, but it's not. It's super smooth, it's super predictable, it's super easy to ride at low speeds, and that really is the magic of this bike and this engine. It's the way that KTM's kind of amalgamated that concept of brute force and clever electronics, and it is just I have to say, it is one of the greatest engines I think I've ever experienced on a motorcycle, and it's a view shared not just by me, but by most of the people that review this bike. Most of the journalists, one of the first things they'll talk about is this engine. And you get on this bike, you ride it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be this one. It could be the R version, it could be the Super Duke, it's Super Duke GT. They all have a very similar 1300cc engine, and honestly, you've got to try this engine at some point in your life. It is just amazing.
So making its way into the 10 things that I immediately love about this KTM has got to be the screen. You can see it up front in this shot here, and in fact it's pretty hard to miss wherever you are on this bike.
It's here as your kind of dashboard for all your needs while you're riding. It tells you, for example, now that I'm running out of petrol and that I'm doing 30 miles an hour. It's the future! We've moved on from analog, but it does have a bit of a kind of analog-y feel to it. It's got like the way that the RPMs show up on that nice little dial there. It's all good. I love it. I think it's amazing. Every bike should have one of these.
So one of the really awesome things about the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S is the throttle control. Now this probably kind of falls slightly into the engine category as well, but I've got to say it is one of the easiest and well-mannered bikes to ride at any speed, and that really comes down to the way that KTM have perfected the fueling and the throttle control on this bike. It is spectacular.
There really isn't much point having a great engine if the way that you control it isn't brilliant, and that's especially important on a bike that has a ride-by-wire system. It means it's effectively, I suppose it's like a mouse controlling a computer, isn't it? You know, you're not actually, you know, pulling a throttle and actuating anything on the engine. It's all done electronically. And I have been on bikes where it hasn't felt right. It's felt a little bit delayed, or a little bit too soft, or a little bit too vague. They've got it just right on this. It's very snappy, but not snappy in a way that's kind of dangerous or unpredictable. And the rider modes really do make a big difference. You put it in sport, it definitely snaps up. That's where you get maximum snappage. But in rain mode, it's pretty, you know, it's very soft. It can make a good bike great. Look at this, some traffic lights have turned green. Must be my lucky day.
So the next point to talk about in terms of the things that have just jumped out and surprised me is a feature that I've always been pretty against for some reason on a bike. I never thought I needed it, I never wanted it, I was never excited about it until I used it. And it is, of course, the cruise control on this bike.
I just love the fact that right now, in a 50 mile an hour limit, I can flick this, I can flick that, and I can just, boy, the liberation. It's the future. I love it. And of course it's pointless on short rides or if you're riding around the city or whatever, but yeah, let's just knock it down a couple of stops. It's for these average speed cameras, you know, it's all easy. And you know, if you're doing long miles on a motorbike, the ability just to give your hand a little rest is really just a luxury. You've got to love it. You've got to love the chill factor of a bit of cruise.
So the next point to talk about is just the all-round flexibility of this bike. It's a bit of a personal one, but I'm finding it to be so versatile and fits into my lifestyle so well.
The fact that this bike really amalgamates that perfect combination of being a fast, decent handling road bike and a bike that you can take off-road, and a bike that you can take on long trips, and a bike that you can enjoy a weekend blast on, and a bike that you can put all your luggage on, and a bike that you can stay comfortable on. For me, if I was to have just one motorcycle, this would be it.
So there's only a couple more points to talk about, but I had to mention the safety features on this bike. There's something really nice about riding a machine that's kind of got your back. You know that somewhere underneath this bulk of material, there's some super clever stuff going on that is just looking after you, looking out for you.
Yeah, so motorcycling is dangerous enough as it is, you know, and as a rider you want to spend as much of your time as possible just observing the stuff that's around you, getting yourself in the right position, and the more time you can dedicate to your environment and not having to worry about, you know, the mechanics of your bike, the better. And there's something nice about knowing that there's some super advanced stuff happening here mechanically on this bike that does make it a safer experience. And it's not to say that it's a completely foolproof system. It's not to say that this is an excuse to go crazy and push the bike beyond its limits, but it is a bit of a safety net there for when things go wrong, for when you hit that gravel patch, for when you come into that corner too hard, for when you just mess up. And it's, you know, and it's there, and it does its magic, and it saves you. And for me, that's worth its weight in gold. I haven't, thankfully, touch wood, put those features to test yet in any way, shape or form. But it's something nice about knowing they're there.
And why not end with just a little bit of controversy?
GS rider, which leads me to my final point. Slightly controversial, but I am pleased that this motorcycle isn't a BMW GS. And I know that sounds a little bit like, oh, you're just hating on the GS. I don't. I absolutely love the GS. I think it's a fantastic motorcycle. But I'd like to be different. I like the KTM brand. It kind of fits with, I suppose, who I kind of want to be, which is, you know, a little bit alternative. A little bit of an underdog. We all like to be an underdog. And for me, the KTM just feels like it's got that going on in its DNA. You know, it's a bike brand that's never been orthodox. It's always tried to kind of twist things up a bit. And I like that. It's a pride of ownership thing. It's, yeah, what have you got, a BMW KTM? I like to say it's a KTM. I don't know, I like to be different. Always have been, and that is absolutely no slight on the BMW GS or GS riders, but it is just the way that I feel about a motorbike in terms of its brand, and that is an important factor.
So that's been my quick top 10 of the initial things that I've just fallen in love with on this bike in the first 500 miles of riding it. Now, by no means is this a definitive list, and I'm sure in time it will change. There are things that will probably enter that list, things that will probably drop out of that list, but for now this is just my initial thoughts on the bike. I have to say it is just the perfect machine for the type of riding that I'm doing. If you've watched previous videos on the channel, you'll know that I was debating between this and the KTM 790 Adventure R. I think I made the right choice, but there are a few things on this bike that aren't perfect, and I'm going to do a follow-up video with the 10 things that I'm not loving so far on this bike. So stay tuned for that. Hit subscribe, hit the little bell icon so you get a notification when that drops, and I'll see you on the next one.